Hallo Freunde, willkommen zurück zu .NET API Review. And I was probably going to do a language other than German today, except I was doing Duolingo until, like, literally the moment this meeting started, so you get German again. Alright, we have a half screen of red, and .NET 11's off screen. It's like we're finishing up and people are realizing that. I think technically the first thing off screen was 12. I stand by it. I had to scroll. So, yeah, we'll see what we can get through today, and there's a possibility we'll start kicking up into 2 meetings a week if we have to, but as you can see from the very few faces above me right now, we're having trouble getting quorum, so we may have to stick with one. Alright, that's enough rambling. First up, change process run and related methods to accept IEnumerable of string instead of IList of string. .NET Runtime 130364. Mr. Sitnik.
Yes. So for those of you who don't remember this release, we have introduced a few high-level process methods. Some of them, they take file process start info, and their overloads take the file name and arguments. They typically run the process and wait for it to exit and report the exit status, or also capture the output and error. But when I was introducing those methods, as usual with my performance mindset, I was like, hey, let's not use IEnumerable and let's use something that has to be materialized up front. But community members have pointed me out that it's not consistent with the other existing process methods, like start, because all of them take IEnumerable of string instead of IList of string. So the proposal is to change all of the new methods to also accept IEnumerable of string.
And you will optimize the implementation internally? I mean, like to check if it is iList instead of like getting the count and stuff like that?
Currently, we don't, because we still have to perform a defensive copy of this collection, so somebody does not add an argument in the middle. But as pointed by Levi and others in the discussion, the cost of starting process is so big compared to those extra few allocations that we shouldn't be blocking the design on this. But it's a valid point, of course.
Yeah, if we were making this change to be more accepting and avoiding somebody needing to create a list to call these, then I'd be arguing about the perf. But if we're actually doing it for consistency, consistency seems good.
One of the contributors asked whether this could be params of IEnumerable string. And we have two overloads, sync and async. My understanding is that cancellation token always needs to be the last argument. So I don't see a way to make it work. We could make it work for start and forget, because it does not take any extra arguments like timeout or cancellation token. But then it would be the only one accepting it, and it would not be consistent. And I'm also not sure what's the story for params IEnumerable string support in F#. And we have received some very warm welcome from the F# community about these new methods, so I don't want to break them.
Yeah, I mean, for C# users, I don't. The fact that all you have to do is wrap all your arguments in square brackets now means, at least Fred is of the opinion that we should never add another params method again. I can't speak for other languages, but
there's still a few places where you end up wanting params, like even with the collection expression syntax, things like string concat and all those, we would still end up having added the 1, 2, and 3 overloads that with params, because you still want the ability for users to have one syntax and for us to internally optimize and avoid the extra work for the common case of only 1, 2, or 3 inputs. But I think for something like this, there's really no reason to have a params, and I think the collection expression is fine.
And to make it params, we'd have to make it a... Actually, can you even have a params with defaults? Like, is that even legal?
You could if you move it to the end of the arguments.
Which would mean it would have to be defaulted? Or maybe params... Yeah. Like, params has to be last, and defaults have to be last, and cancellation token should be last, and should be defaulted, and when too many things are vying for last. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I think the change is proposed, since you show here process start already takes IEnumerable. This seems like good consistency. Anyone want to object?
Looks good. I do want to call out the other case that is odd here, and a reason why params ends up not being nice is because we have that run on of string, and then the params of strings, and that always ends up confusing people because then you have to think, is the first string its own argument or part of the params in that particular setup? And we've typically avoided that kind of scenario in the past as well. So that's just plus one more reason why params is not a good idea here.
Yeah, I can agree to that, but also I feel like nobody's confused by it in stringed up format. But maybe they just have a special stringed up format hole in their brain. All right. Copy. I'll just take these out so they're not confusing. All right. It was faster than I expected. Maybe we will get through these things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you again in a few minutes. JSON structural union type classifier for structural union discrimination 129805. So Paulus.
Hello. A couple of months back, we introduced SDJ support for union types, and most controversially, we made the decision from the perspective of deserialization to never try to be too smart when it comes to inferring the actual union case we want to deserialize a particular payload into. But we did add an infrastructure that let users define their own classifiers so that they can, content sniff to their heart's desire to determine the actual target type. So this API proposal basically proposes that we build in an opt-in structural union type classifier, which basically tries to do a best effort structural classification for object types. So it would only try to identify membership of a particular payload on the basis of what properties the JSON payload specifies. So I guess folks can see the code sample at the bottom of the proposal that shows that it successfully infers that the first payload is a dog because it has a name property and a breed property, and the second payload targets cat for the same reason. Now, it's potentially outside the scope of API review, but we can have a conversation on what the classifier should be doing if you think we have the time. I'm open to questions if anybody in the chat has any.
I mean, based on the sample that you have here at the bottom, it looks like it's if it can, use pattern matching to determine that one and only one type is eligible, then it succeeds, and if it can't, then it throws, and that seems sane to me. I would be unhappy if this case picked dog because it was listed first in the union type, for example.
Yeah.
But as long as it's not ambiguous and somebody explicitly says fuzzy match me, because this is a deceptively bad performance line of code.
Yep, 100%. And I think it is also bound to disappoint people still, because it will not address 100% of the use cases. Ideally, when such non-trivial classification scenario arise, we would want to steer people towards using polymorphism, aka emitting a natural discriminator on the wire, so that we can classify by name. But at the same time, we do acknowledge that, you know, such scenario may arise, and therefore, you know, we do offer that as an opt-in.
What's the structural in the name for?
So structurally classify the type of the payload. So looking at the
Gotcha.
properties that the payload contains.
Structural meaning it is classifying the union type based on the structure of the. Okay.
The payload.
Not a structural union, but a.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Happy to take feedback on the naming, of course.
And sounds like crickets.
Yeah, you might also notice that the class is unsealed because we expect people might subclass this to override the classification function, of course.
It all seems reasonable to me and solves at least part of the problem that people are seeing.
All right. Is there anything surprising that you want to discuss?
Are the remarks for this type in the docs going to call out that this is likely a perf pitfall and you should probably use other pattern instead if you care about perf?
Yeah, the docs will clearly state that this potentially entails quadratic complexity depending on how you structure your models. For example, if you define a tree using union types and you turn on structural classification for each and every union case, your tree may potentially have quadratic deserialization time and therefore making it a vector for you know, denial of service attacks.
So it's not like greedy, it does backtracking.
It does backtrack.
Like once you go into, yeah, like so once you go in the nested types, if it no longer matches, it'll go back out and see if the other union works. I mean, that's pretty cool, but yeah, that's good to know.
And then so you're also sniffing the content type?
That is subject to me making a decision, but this has been requested. I know for a fact that we don't like that, but given that it's opt-in, it's something we could consider. At the moment, I'm tending towards making this an object-only classifier, and if you have a union that mixes GWIDs with datetime offset and plain text, the classifier might throw an exception. And if you're not happy with that, you can subclass your classifier and include clauses for sniffing the GWIDs. That's me saying that this text is somewhat out of date.
Fair enough.
Compared to the prototypes that I have. But I'm happy to accept feedback on whether we should do this at all.
I was wondering, like, does it make sense to have like a greedy mode for this classifier? but I guess it depends on how you structure things, like
Can
whether it's
you,
even
could you define greedy mode?
where if like, yeah, I guess where it just like disables backtracking. Like where if as soon as it finds something that like doesn't match, instead of going up a level or two in the object, it just fails. But maybe that is more trouble than it's worth.
I mean,
Does
it
that make
always
sense
has
even?
that.
Yeah.
No, in the sense that the JSON reader is always, well, basically the way STJ works, you have to backtrack. Like you basically, for the purposes of classification, you need to checkpoint your JSON reader and classify based on a copy. And once a decision is taken, then you fall back to using the checkpointed reader. So in the sense of like forcing you to read the payload only once, like that's not a possibility, based on how STJ works today.
Yeah, and it's something that, if it even makes sense, could probably be added later. I think having the thing that works as much as it possibly can makes sense, even if it's slow.
Does this only work for top level property discrimination, or if you have two types that both have a name and a value, but their value types are different, is it going to dive into value and figure out which type value had to have been?
So I didn't quite get the question.
So if you have dog has a name and a favorite toy, which is a dog toy type, and a cat has a name and a favorite toy, which is a cat toy type, all that
Then
you
the
could see from the
classifier-
JSON is they both have a name and a favorite toy. Is it going to
Right.
pop into favorite toy and ask which, like, can I tell now from this sub property or from this property's value which type it would have had to be in order to know to match the top type?
So if I understand the question correctly, is you have two types with exact same shapes from the perspective of what property names they define?
Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, the classifier would actually fail at configuration time. It would give an error saying that, listen, you tried to specify a structural classifier, but I looked at the static shapes of these types, put as many air quotes on static here as you like, but it will tell you that, this won't do because these are similarly shaped and therefore, write your own damn classifier.
Okay, so it's not going to dive through the hierarchy to find the first semantic
No,
thing.
no.
It's a surface level match.
So it restricts itself to depth of 0, and it won't nest deeper. And therefore, for example, arrays, contrary to what this issue description says, in my current iteration of the prototype, arrays are disallowed. They are barred from structural classification, which means that if your union defines two separate collection types, again, it will throw at configuration time. And the reason for that is, you could have scenario like jagged arrays or having to classify the empty array. In all these cases, you would basically have to flip a coin to pick the actual type, and that's not great. So arrays are out of scope.
Eric, for the structural versus the scalar value one there, I'm wondering if we should make the scalar value one just a completely different classifier. That way I could opt into scalar values without opting into structural.
As in authoring a separate type.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to compose the two, it might work, but I'm not necessarily sure it's easy. We might consider making this a property on the classifier, perhaps. But my instinct tells me that most users would want classification between objects, because typically that's what you define unions of. And if we receive feedback that, hey, people want more, I do anticipate that we might augment the type with additional options that control how it works.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I certainly see a trade-off there of augmenting with more properties to control its behavior versus composition, where composition might actually require multiple passes over it to have multiple classifiers try.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
like
thanks.
content sniffing always feels icky to me. But like looking at this case of GUID, date time offset, and other is that's what you said in the union, so the fact that it can distinguish them doesn't feel terrible. Like you said do the matchy thing, and it was capable of doing the matchy thing. So, but it would be if you don't do it in the first version, you have to consider the breaking changes of if somebody had a thing that was an object type, a string, and a GUID, and for some reason they were serializing it, and it happens to look like a GUID. If it's a string in V1 and a GUID in V2, then that's surprising.
Well, if Jeremy, if you of all people expressed an opinion in favor of content sniffing, that's probably a signal that it might be a good idea for this API.
I'm just given the listing here, this doesn't feel ambiguous to me. It feels
sure.
it feels brittle.
What if it had
but-
daytime and daytime offset in the union?
I mean, so I don't know what all formats could be content sniffed, but looking at what's on the screen right here, I'm saying I can believe in this classification style.
Okay.
Right, like they all have try parse APIs, right? Like, would you just try parsing it with everything and see if more than one thing returns true? I mean, it seems.
Well, I mean, my default here would be that if there is ambiguity, then order of declaration is significant.
Oh, really?
So if you put, so if you put string ahead of everything, perhaps it's a case that everything would default to string. So they're in start.
I wouldn't have expected order to matter on a union type. That's interesting. So the order you declared in the union.
I mean, if you have like 5 try parses and 3 of them return true, which one would you pick?
None of them. But I mean, so I do understand not wanting to call try parse on everything because it's inefficient, but the whole thing's inefficient. But you could check to see if multiple things match and fail, and then it wouldn't be order dependent.
But it's assuming that this string succeeds for both date time offset and date time. If
then
you
it
had
fail.
GUID, date time offset, date time, and string, do you want it to be date time offset, date time, string, or exception?
I do see how it could be useful to have a precedence. So yeah.
Yeah.
Like having string as like a catch-all is kind of convenient.
Yeah, I mean, again, it makes the docs weird because it would be of the triparsy types, the order matters, and of the object shape matching, order doesn't matter. If it ends ambiguous, it's a fail. So,
is there anything else where the order of the union matters?
Well, I mean, I'm not aware of anybody else building libraries on top of unions right now. Other
Fair
than
enough.
ASP.NET
Yeah,
Core.
yeah. First time for everything. I was just curious. I think it's the first time, but yeah.
yeah. So I guess, my with my engineer and where we are in the calendar time, or where we are on the calendar hat on, I would say maybe ship this. And because the problem is if you allow it to match string in V1, then this all becomes ambiguous. Yeah, maybe just only support object types in V1.
Yeah, and so if we do add primitives, we'll make it opt-in. We have to make it opt-in, I think.
If all primitives would fail in V1, then so if you don't support the union of int and string, If all primitives fail in V1, only object types work. Then you can add the object or primitives later. So
Sounds good to me.
The key would be like we would just fail if there's any primitive in the union at that point, or
So
Yeah.
it would fail. So let me talk about the default semantics when you deserialize unions. Deserialization for unions without a classifier would always succeed, assuming that each of the union cases serialize as different JSON types. So if you have a union between a string, an object, and an int, this would succeed
This
by
already
default.
works.
Because,
Yeah.
because we can do an O1 check on the payload and decide where it belongs. So, the custom classifier should be able to do at least that. So the implementation would be checking if duplicate things that serialize as JSON string exist. And it would fail if more than one of these things exist.
which means string will work, which means adding these later is a breaking change.
That's what I was kind of worried about. But
Yeah. I think it would be perfectly fine once you slap this classifier on it. If it just says fail, you have a primitive type in the set. You can either do shape matching or you can do the default matching, but not the union, which would, the union.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure I get that. So the case that I've often had is I have either an int or an object, or a GUID or an object. In that case, I can't use structural union type classifier. But I can write my own classifier to detect that.
Given that
that
we're
right?
adding the feature in RC1, that is my recommendation.
I just want to make sure I'm unblocked that I would be able to write my own classifier if that is that right, Eric? If I wanted a GUID or object classifier, I could still implement that myself, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Good with me then.
It
And a
is
GUID
on the
isn't
same
already
boilerplate,
considered
though.
Sorry.
So I was just going to say that it is possible, and of course it is possible to write a structural classifier. The only concern here is that it is forcing the same boilerplate on everyone, and kind of shipping it ourselves makes sense. And if we don't do it in 11, we can do it at 12.
Yeah, my only, because of the coming up with all the confusing things that can happen and ordering mattering, and someone even asked in chat, does the language even guarantee that the order that you write them here is preserved in IL for all times, and the order you read it from IL is thus semantic. So saying that the order matters means we're assuming that the language and the runtime agree that the order is preserved. And we might know that already, but I don't know that.
I would need to double check that.
Right. So, yeah, my recommendation is once they slap this word on it, it becomes objects only. They can theoretically extend this type and then do Jeff's GUID or object matching, but then they've now signed up for the custom work on their own to handle the ambiguity later. So, sounds like V1 needs no knobs, and therefore this is the correct shape. Does anyone want to bike shed on the name? Chat throughout JSON fallback union type classifier, JSON structural union fallback type classifier, and the very, very bad perf classifier.
The only nit I have is structural people are likely going to assume relates to structs and therefore value types. And this is not related to structs. Otherwise, I think the name is fine.
I've never heard structural refer to structs or value types, though. Maybe structure, but even then, no. Definitely not structural.
So, Tanner, do you want JSON union type property name matching classifier?
Oof.
It's possible that if we just
guessing-
move structural to after union type, then maybe it flows better there.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think
the
that
base
would
type
be
is
confusing a little.
Generally, I do think structural makes sense before union type because and this is getting pretty pedantic, but I think usually when you use a noun as an adjective, like union type classifier, you want to put that like right before the noun it's modifying.
Yeah, but you could also say that a structural classifier is a thing, and this is a structural classifier that applies to union types.
I think just to my ear too, like I was trying to come up with a grammatical reason for it, but to my ear, it sounds a little more natural to say structural union type classifier than union type structural classifier.
What about layout instead of structural?
Because I guess for me the problem is I looked at it and my brain immediately decided a structural union must be a thing. So it broke structural union were the two words instead of union type.
Right, and that's why I figured people might confuse it for struct is because they're seeing struct union basically together. And especially
do
people
have,
who aren't as familiar with
sorry.
the space are going to confuse the word structural, even if most of us know that it's not the same as struct.
Someone pointed out that iStructural comparable and iStructural equatable exist in
Aren't those
system
the
collections
XF
correlate. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that interface borrows from the same terminology, so
I think structural's fine, and I don't think people are going to confuse it with. Do you really think that people are going to confuse it with value types?
I'm gonna stop
I think so.
writing the
'Cause
constructors.
I've seen people already confuse it for iStructural, equatable, and comparable, which we also keep rejecting putting on new types.
Other paradigm that I'll suggest, but I also don't know that I like it, is JSON union type classifier by structure and kind of introducing the by something suffix that we would then have them all aligned to.
I mean, we have a really, I mean, aside from the fact that this is proposing extending a classifier factory with a classifier, I'm sure that makes sense for a reason. That we usually latch on to the sort of base class concept is the last word. I don't know that we've ever added a by in the name.
I will say there is a precedent in subclassing factory things with names that don't end in factory, in STJ at least. So to give you an example, we have JSON string enum converter derived from JSON converter factory. And I'm guessing the original intention there was that people who decorate their types needn't know that their thing is a factory as such. And I kind of buy that rationale. Like you should only know that it is a factory if you're trying to subclass it, but you needn't know that it's a factory if you're just using it. The union component in the proposed name reflects the fact that this only works on union types, whereas type classifier factories work on both union types and polymorphic types in general. So this basically reflects the fact that it would be a no-op if you use it on your polymorphic type that uses discriminators.
All right, then I will vote for JSON union type blank classifier as the naming scheme we would go with.
Why union type blank and not blank union type?
I I had the same initial thought as Jeremy of structural union type. It's
Yeah, because
Yeah,
even
it's-
here it's like a JSON layout union type classifier, and maybe the problem is because a type classifier is a
yeah,
thing we already have, and so it's like maybe the breaking type away from classifier is important instead of
Even,
Yeah.
even just JSON union sounds like it might be a thing.
Mhm.
But that one at least is everything else here is prefixed with JSON, like everything else in the namespace. So people should at least be able to make that disconnection.
Mhm.
yeah. So this is a JSON union type classifier of a kind, and I like the put the descriptive word before classifier to describe what kind of classifier it is. That resonated with me a lot.
Okay, well, that gives us so far JSON union type structural classifier, JSON union type layout classifier, JSON union type object shape classifier, and JSON union type the really, really, really bad perf classifier.
All right. So it seems like people like the other order. I don't think it's that bad either way. I still like structural more than layout or object shape, to be honest. But maybe it's just because I've heard structural used in this context.
Would
I
would
don't
type
have-
composition also work?
What do you mean?
Type composition instead of structural, it would be composition or composite.
Well, I don't think we'd want to say type composition because then it would be JSON union type composition.
I mean,
guess-
structural typing is a fairly established term, right? Like it's not unique to high structural and quality compare.
It's not a unique term to the industry, but it is one of those terms that I think you more find compiler engineers, especially functional compiler engineers, going towards, and it's not necessarily a term that you find .NET using as much.
I mean, I don't know if .NET just like has a need for this kind of terminology a lot of the time. Like, it's not that we're using like object shape or layout or composition to mean this anywhere else either.
Yeah, like I'm not aware of any alternative terminologies that we use within .NET to mean structural typing.
We
Is it-
do use structural already, so I don't understand why we're so against it.
Yeah, is
It's a new
anybody
Kotlin.
is anybody familiar with MEF?
Yeah, I mean, not a lot, but I know that it's plugin infrastructure.
Like
Microsoft
it's
Extensions
it's the
Foundation.
does this mean the same thing?
Oh, I don't know enough about MEF to say that. I would assume so.
Because again, there's a little bit of are we using the right word and then are we using the word in the same or a different way that it would be used elsewhere in the framework? And-
The maybe interesting thing here is that type is kind of the most accurate thing because we have a union type or rather we have a type union where we are trying to classify the type that it represents. And maybe that's an important distinction to make since we are potentially going to have discriminated unions as well in the future, and this one is specifically for typed unions. So maybe JSON typed union type classifier, or maybe even just JSON typed union classifier.
I will say that closed classes are C#'s discriminated unions. Maybe that's a bit controversial, but I think that's true. And also a union that is discriminated, I think would by definition get serialized using a discriminator. I expect that's almost a given.
And even if it wasn't a given, like even if a discriminator wasn't using a discriminator, then it's effectively using the structure of the type. to do
Um,
the discrimination.
Yeah, while people continue bike shedding over the name, Eric, what happens here? Ignore the cat toy and dog toy thing. But if I don't think all the union members have to be sealed, so I don't know, haircut. That's a thing poodles have, right?
And
if
poodle is a subclass of dog, presumably.
Yeah.
Nothing. Poodle is not taken into account when examining pet's contract. It can only exist
What if
as
you
a
add it?
one-time pet. Well, if you add it, then you effectively insert a third shape that has three properties: name, favorite toy, and haircut. In which case, need to double check, but I believe that the classifier would look at the presence of a haircut property to determine that it is in fact
a
a
poodle.
case poodle rather than a case dog.
Okay.
And if there was no haircut property, even though it's like optional here, it would just be a dog.
Yeah.
I
Right.
will say as well, I'm not against structural, especially with it in the latter half. If everyone else think that that's fine, it's not a hard blocker on my end. And as an extra plug, we can now use source.net for fuzzy matching, and it no longer only looks at the first part of the word, so you can search for structural and it will find structural in any part of the word, even if it's the second part. And it will also find the related terms like structure and just sort them closer to the bottom. So it's much more useful for finding things that that have a term in them now.
Right. I'm fine with 20. It's not my favorite ordering, but I think it's the best that we have some consensus on.
All right. Strong objections? Better proposals? All right. Jason, union type structural classifier. Sold.
Thank you.
All right. Unify sync and async option validation contracts. Runtime 130719er. Mr. Halter.
Yeah, so the basic premise behind this API is that we should never be in a situation where you get an options object with validators registered, even if they're async validators, where they're skipped. So there's a pattern that we used for the validation attribute and the async validatable object where it inherits from their synchronous counterpoint, synchronous counterpart, and it gives the implementer a chance to decide what to do in the sync case. If they want to do sync over async, that's their choice. If they want to throw or do something else, they can do that too. so there's been a lot of discussion around what we do, like when there's like a configuration change, and we have like a stale but validated options instance, and where and if we can use that. I don't think that's too relevant to this API proposal exactly. I do want to use the stale validated object where possible today in the existing synchronous APIs like iOptions.value kind of stuff. But if we can't, and we're in a synchronous context, we should just run synchronous validation rather than skip it, which is what we currently have checked in. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, I don't show what's in these base types or base interfaces, but it's validate without the async, right?
Jeff, are you here to represent the dissenting opinion?
I can represent the hesitant opinion, which was that when we first talked about this in API review, we discussed that we ourselves were the only caller of this, and we could kind of control this behavior, and that's why we were okay deviating a bit. But based on customer feedback on the previews and Stefan's additional thoughts here, I'm also convinced we should make the change. The customer feedback on Reddit was that otherwise this would be a foot gun, that this silently succeeds in validation.
Yeah, like one of the worst cases for me, which really made me pause and be like, all right, we should put more work into this, is if you resolve the options before we call like host.start async, which is totally possible, then we just skip async validation currently and then continue using the unvalidated options after startup, just like a double whammy, just because you happen to resolve the options a little bit sooner. So this avoids that. This, you'll call the sync path and it does what it does based on the implementation.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't remember the details, but I do know that we did ask in the last meeting, and I think that's what you were saying, Jeff, of we maybe concluded this because we thought it was internal only, and the community feedback is you're lying, just deal with it. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like we call it all internally, but then we do it from sync pass, and what we decided to do is the skip in that case. And yeah, in the end, I just don't think it's too much of a foot gun, like Jeff said.
Okay, and I'm writing the answer, but I'll say the answer. The contravariance is being dropped because iValidate options is invariant. Not to be confused with invariant, which is contravariant. All right. We'll see which one of those they get first. All right. Sounds like there are no objections. This is a breaking change.
Both yes, it is a preview to preview breaking change.
Yeah, both because you've introduced mandatory methods in the type and you've broken or you've removed a variance. So,
right.
Boop, boop, boop. Break. I guess Adams was also a breaking change. Because it's the diff, anything with the diff's a breaking change, the method doesn't exist anymore.
Do we mark breaking a change for between previews? I mean, like this is interesting.
Yep.
We don't always create a doc for them we make a judgment call most of the time, but a lot of them end up being widely used enough that we do.
And it'll get covered in release notes either way.
Yeah, like it. We care about breaking preview to preview less than we care about breaking release to release, but the writing down, hey, by the way, this thing may not compile anymore. Here's what you have to switch to. I don't think we. Yeah, I feel like we don't care as much about you compiled against preview 6 and are running on preview 7 and you get a missing method exception, but we care about you compiled against preview 6 and preview 7 doesn't compile.
But this is obvious case. I mean, like, why this is a problem?
Just
I'm not seeing any problem with that. I mean,
Yeah.
like, yeah. I mean, it's a preview of something change, and
it's
you
it's
have to
possible
update.
we don't need to dock it. I just was like, this is a compile breaking change, in addition to a runtime breaking change. So let's I'll just slap the thing on it, and somebody can remove it later.
I will say, not to like break into jail here, the one thing about this API. Oh, sorry. If we move, never mind. We can move on.
Okay. Next up, we
Hey,
pop the
Rand,
stack
Stefan.
back to Eric with JSON polymorphic attribute infer closed type polymorphism 130809. Or I tried. Eric?
Was I still muted? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Now I hear you.
Okay. So this is a follow-up to another proposal that got approved recently, which was adding support for closed inference of derived types for closed classes. At the time, excuse me, my dev box is interfering with my monitor. So at the time, we kind of decided that we wanted to scope this to JSON serializer options, and we picked a new name that kind of explicitly made it clear that people were enabling this for closed classes only. But in retrospect, sorry, random things are failing on my desktop right now. Sorry. In retrospect, we as I was working on the feature, I kind of decided that by removing this inference flag from type declaration, that we are removing a significant functionality from the table. And therefore, I kind of took the name as it was approved on JSON serializer options, infer closed type polymorphism, and put it back on JSON polymorphic attribute. This lets people opt into inference at the type level rather than globally. And yeah, kind of using that same name for me works because it makes it very clear that it only works for closed classes. It does not work for polymorphic classes in general.
So so this and the more global settings are they truthy saturating or are they most specific saturating?
I didn't quite catch that, sorry.
So if the global one says false, which it does by default, and the local one says true, then you had true. If the global one says true and the local one doesn't set the property, is it true or false?
So we generally have a convention there because this pattern of global versus local is proliferated. My answer would be whatever we use for all the other settings.
Fair enough.
Makes sense?
As long as, yeah, following on prior art is the best answer. It'd be nice if we knew what that prior art was, but
I would need to double check. But I would caveat this with, if you're using AOT and the source generator, this flag kind of kicks off a sort of discovery process by the source generator where all the derived types are found at compile time and contracts for the derived types is being generated. If for whatever reason you are running on AOT, you did not specify infer close type polymorphism on the attribute, but then you do specify it on the JSON serializer options at runtime, you would be getting an exception.
Fair enough. All right. Seems easy enough to me. Objections, alterations, applause. Silence has it. And I will try Evkaristo.
Παρακαλώ.
That must have been close enough.
That's just a response to what you said. It's
Yeah,
not- I'm not
Exactly.
correcting you.
I mean, I must have been close enough. How was my pronunciation?
Marvelous.
Thank you. I mean, Evkaristo.
You will have teased.
All right. Popping back to Adam, I believe. Add signal and process exit status members to process 128322.
Yes,
Yes.
it's me. It's me again, and it's process again.
I thought we were going to end the meeting, but we're only half done.
So, for Preview 4, we have introduced plenty of new APIs for safe process handle. We have wait for exit, try wait for exit, and their async counterparts. We did the same for signal, but we haven't introduced them to process yet. My plan was just to get them in, wait for feedback, and if people like them, then make them part of the process as well in the future releases. However, as Tom Dessain from Red Hat has pointed, there is one tricky thing. Process already has wait for exit methods. So if we ever want to introduce those methods to process, we could call them wait for exit status, because the existing methods, they return void. They just, you just know that the process has finished. You don't know what's the status, the exit code, etc. So the proposal is to expose those methods for process as well, namely signal and wait for exit status, try wait for exit status, and wait for exit status async. And I believe that for the sake of the consistency, then we should also consider renaming the safe process handle methods. If you scroll down a bit, Jeremy, we will see them. They're in this div right here. So the simple ones, they just get the status suffix. The wait for exit or kill on cancellation becomes even longer, but it's consistent with the rest.
All right. Well, for the first set, if we didn't have an async one, I was going to ask, why don't we just add it as an out overload for wait for exit? But then we'd have to come up with an answer for the async. And once the async needs a different name, then making them all have a different name seems fine. Does anyone want to agree or disagree to that point? Okay. And then I'll say my off-the-cuff reaction is not to rename the methods on safe process handle, because the method name isn't ambiguous, and if we could just change the wait for exit to return the status, we would. So I wouldn't make the names on the safe process handle longer, just so they match process.
That's great, because then it's not a breaking change, and I can sneak it inside the release candidate one without any paperwork.
But then we're also just adding signal.
Yes.
Do we emulate signals on Windows, or is this throws on Windows?
We support one signal, the one that forcefully terminates
Mhm.
the process.
Sig kill.
Yeah.
But if you send sig term, you get a PNSE.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we tried to implement it on Windows, but I have given up after a few days. It's a long story. Maybe one day we're going to make them work on Windows as well.
Mm-hmm. Tanner,
Yes.
is there anything with ORP and similar features that would let us hide the void method and replace it with a different return code?
No, because the signatures still have to be legal for C#, and you cannot overload by.
Return type on the same class.
Yeah.
Right. We could new slot it on a derived type, but I don't think we want to make a base class for process to move wait for exit down to, so we can new slot it to replace the code.
I don't.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll go with the rename. We'd have to do something for these middle two anyway, because, or I guess for the bottom three. Well, no, because this one would be to replace task with task of T. But these bool ones would have to just change. So.
And there is one difference between them. The existing methods, they also wait for process to report end of file. If the output has been redirected, the new methods, they don't do that. They just wait for the exit, nothing more, nothing less. And it's important because it has been a source of deadlocks for a while. Because, for example, people start a process that with output redirected, it starts another process, it inherits the pipes, handles, and then the child process quits, but the grandchild keeps running, and the wait for exit does not return because it believes that the process is still running, despite the fact that it has already finished.
Fair enough. All right. So my vote is for yes to block 1 and no to block 2. Anybody else?
That sounds good to me.
I wasn't doing this during the talking part, but I wasn't. All right. All right, there's a question. What do you do today? What's wrong with getting exit code property after wait for exit?
If I remember correctly, it can block if the process hasn't finished. I would need to check. But I'm not 100% sure. But the main problem with the existing methods is, as I said, they wait for end of file, which is often tricky. And this method combines both and makes it seamless. So what is async is async, and it does only that, what it's supposed to do.
Fair enough. And I guess on Unix it would not have the signal information.
Yes. On Windows, you get only exit code. On Unix, you get both exit code and signal.
All right. Unless something surprising comes up in chat, I think we are ready to move on. I should actually mark this issue approved. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. All right. WinForms issue 14586. Introduce kiosk mode manager component. Unless you'd rather do the other one first, Klaus.
Yeah, can we start with 14583?
Okay. Instead, 14583 application system visual settings.
Yeah, so it's like the order of importance. A couple of images or animated GIFs describes the issue. Windows has meanwhile a couple of settings that customers need to pick up in WinForms apps. Most of all, the text scaling. There was no like proper way to actually do that. The animated GIF shows principally what it's about. It's like when you change the certain Windows settings around accessibility, then we need to have a way to pick those up in WinForms apps, which you could not do before. And this API principally introduces a couple of APIs that bundles all those accessibility settings that Windows provides and allows us then to get notifications so that we can react to them and adjust the apps accordingly. That's pretty much what that is about.
Okay. All right. So what's the order you want to walk through the things?
Well, I mean, it's more or less. I mean, the properties that we're getting are more or less self-descriptive. The accent color is the color that you actually like. It's the same terminology in Windows also. It's the color that if you want to defines the outline of your windows, defines the color of your start bar, and also a couple of visual effects that Windows uses, and we are trying to mimic for example for focusing purposes that as well as we can. The text scale factor then is the percentage that you are adjusting in the accessibility for the text that we can pick up then. High contrast enabled is for us a very important gate not to render any special visual effects because it would compromise accessibility for the contrast that we need to stick by. So that is like super important thing that we need to have. Client animation area animation enabled is a boolean that we can that we get from Windows also. If Windows asks us to suppress animation, that's important for, let's say, Citrix or remote desktop environments. But you can also disable and enable it directly in Windows. And then you can also adjust the visual keyboard cues and and then finally the focus border metrics, so that we have a cue for how thick certain focus indicators can be rendered or not. Terminology is pretty much spin-off of Windows directly, and so the mechanism is that when we're getting the events, when anything of those things changed, we get the old settings and the new settings so that we can compare the settings directly, but then also we're getting an enum to find out what of those things have changed, or the combination of the things that have changed. And that's pretty much it.
Would somebody who's working in WinForms know what client area animation means? Because I don't.
Well, but I mean, sure, that I would say the people that are designing UIs would think for a moment, but they can derive by the pain that they have. They will probably know what it is. So people affected by that will recognize that. Yes, I'm sure.
Okay, because I understand animations enabled, but the throwing in the client area feels like it's adding a specificity that I don't understand. So
yeah, it's very particular, but I mean, we can. I would not have any problems to name that differently. It's a little longer ago, so I would say when I came up with the name, then it was directly derived from Windows, and I think if you go into settings, I mean, actually, when we scroll down, this is actually no, it's just called animation effects in Windows directly. I would need to look it up, but I think that the original structure that I'm getting from the system had something to do with client animation, so I just took it over. But as I said, I mean, I'm not terribly concerned about the naming. Just that I get the data.
Can you explain it more? I mean, like what exactly client area animation means?
Yeah, if you scroll even down further, there is a stress test that I had to see if I mean, just to the picture that does all these animations.
oh, so up.
Yeah, and this up and a little bit down.
Oh, so just this
And
guy.
yeah, okay, that one exactly. I mean, it's a GIF, so it doesn't render in the speed. So everything you see here is pretty much a client animation, and so that we have a smooth transition from one thing to the other. If we disable that, then we're just jumping from a condition to a condition, a visual condition to a condition. And the reason is then for accessibility reasons, that might be an important thing, but also for performance reasons when we're rendering on remote desktop environments that can get in the way. There was one of the things back in the day when WPF and animations were introduced that caused a lot of headaches to people, and yeah, that's pretty much what that is about.
Is there non-client area animation?
Yeah, I think that's really the client area makes me wonder what the non-client area is.
Yeah. So what I would say is an animation. If you, for example, move a window from one point to the next, then there would not be a client animation. I think everything that is animated inside of a top level window is the terminology that Windows uses for, designate that as a client animation. And that might be confusing. And I am also guessing more than really knowing it at this point. But as I said, it's derived from the original. I mean, we can just shorten that to animation in general and then make it clear over the docs, but it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Even though I'm questioning would someone know what client area means, the fact that Windows is calling it client area in their docs makes me think we should leave the words in case they understand something that's not the client area.
Along the same lines, and I don't know if this matters, but could there be a different setting related to animation that could change in the future, like animation speed? I asked mostly because of the flag just being called animation. Or animations.
I mean, I
Probably
saw
not.
the most, yeah, I mean, there's probably then a client animation X at one point when Windows introduces it, or X2 or an X3. I mean, that's the namings that we're dealing with. I don't think so that it gets so particular. And then the reason is also, what do we want to pick up? Because one thing we made absolutely clear is we don't want to mess with our third parties. They have like concentrating on theming and all that. This is not the point. This is everything that we do around like visual styling is around accessibility. So for example, if we now introduce this checkbox that moves from left to right, there's one new accessibility requirement, if you will, in many states, that we have a certain kind of size for landing areas. And if you take a look at the classic rendered Win32 checkbox, and you have that in let's say on a 4K monitor, then you have to aim at this point to get it clicked, and it is just not sufficient enough anymore. So this is why we actually came up for that, and this is the same thing if you scroll up a little bit, especially in dark mode now, when you see there was no way to adjust the padding in a text box, so that when we at the beginning is that visible when we switch from the normal styles to the visual styles, then the rounded corners is certainly more of a style decision where we like copied the WinUI stuff. But actually, the accessibility point again is that we're introducing padding for the text box so that people actually have like able to actually, have a little bit more landing area there. And then with picking up the colors of when we change the accent colors, this is also seen here. We cannot implement that plain in the old visual styles because we would then just break the world. So visual styles is also then a way to have people opt in. So, and that makes every feature that we did around visual styles also very risk-free, because if you don't pick visual styles up, then everything stays as it is. You really have to opt in into visual styles to get those things, and you also have to opt in and handle those events like color change or text size change in your app. We're not automizing that. There are voices that say we should, but we cannot do that because the risk is just too big. people still do pixel perfect layouts in WinForms, and those things would become a migration blocker. And so that's, I think, the compromise we can do.
So just hitting or searching for animation in the system parameters info A function. Presumably we call it info W, but whatever. It looks like the non-client area is the menu area. So get menu fade whether or not menu
okay.
fade animations are enabled. So are we showing
I mean,
the menu options?
well, the thing is that we're not animating menus because we still have our own rendered menus. Should we do that at one point? I mean, is it possible to add to an enum, to a flex enum most of all, without a binary breaking change?
Yep.
Just might be a little confusing with the generic animations already there, but
well, that's
so
that's why I said we should probably just leave the name client area, because that's what Windows is
in
calling
the flag name as well.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So now down here we'd have the, presumably we want to change this to say client area animations.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yes.
Because then depending on where the structure shows up the other stuff later, this would be bit 6 is menus.
Yes.
So
yes, yeah.
And I think this is fine. This is more just a question for future reference. Is like, do we always include none in flag enums, even if we don't expect none to like show up as a value?
Yeah, like so. There's no easy answer in the realm of WinForms, but that has to do with the designer and with the non-deterministic order in how we are serializing and deserializing properties. Let's just say none is a very safe thing to have. It's a natural fallback, if you will, and makes things clear. Yeah.
Do you think you'll actually use none for the event handler in some circumstances? Not that that would be a reason to exclude it.
Probably yes, because the moment we are getting, let's say they add to that, and we're not picking up the area because it doesn't affect us, I would still get the event, and I'm not sure. I think we should not filter. We should not filter. If it's none, then we're not affected, and then maybe it will be at the point something that before we can react, people can actually to react, because at that point they would know, well, for the time being, none might be something new, and for the next .NET version, we could probably then pick it up. Would it become important?
But that is the name if you have it. The question is, well, like, yeah.
But I would still, I would rather have it as 0 and then fire than event than not and filtering it out. I would not filter it out if I cannot.
Yeah, and I could see maybe someone, like, I don't know why you would use it for some bitwise operation. Maybe like perhaps it makes sense for that.
I mean, yeah, because all enums you can compare to 0. Flags enums you can definitely compare to 0, but there's definitely the walk through, and if I understand this bit, clear it. If I understood, or if it was set and I understood it, clear it. And then at the end, if it's not none, print. I didn't understand the following bits.
Right, and people are definitely going to use that because has flag used to be so slow. And anyway,
and so they am I even looking at?
I mean, but now? This is not in this particular case, it's not a really like hot path.
Well, what would happen right now if somebody, if the menu animation setting changed, your callback into Windows is presumably going to fire. Are you going to not call the callback if you can't figure out what changed, or are you going to call it and say you couldn't figure out what changed, so you set none? Or rather, you set nothing, so none is the value they get.
I think Klaus just
call-
said the latter. Just call
Yeah.
the callback.
Yeah. So none could be the value somebody even sees.
That
Yeah.
too. Yeah, so all the more reasons included.
Yeah, we have the always name your zero value so that when you print an enum, it doesn't toString as 0. That's a earlier. Always give your enum a 0 value.
Mm.
So. Okay, so we know we want to rename this to client area animations. Chat has already asked, why are we not just using event handler of T?
Oh, yeah. That's an old WinForms long-standing issue that comes up at every review that has to do with Visual Basic that we still support. It's not necessarily not working in Visual Basic, but it does not necessarily work reliably in the designer. We need to still make sure that the code stays a little bit compatible between the designers. What I mean with that is that remember that the classic WinForms designer is still based on .NET 2, and we are using code model CodeDOM to represent certain things. And when it comes to event handler of T, there are limits. There is a way to use it now, but I am not confident yet. And now every new event that we introduced, even since in the .NET era, we did not pick up on the on T. Yeah, and now it's also like almost a coding style thing. I mean, we can probably for .NET 12 think about that, but we couldn't before. Visual Basic is just the thing. There is a lot of Visual Basic still going on in WinForms. A lot.
I have
Local
a quick question.
consistency often wins it. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, I was just gonna be in favor of like if this is what we do in WinForms, then local consistency seems
So
fine to me.
you need to understand the big difference in and that is also cost a little bit of headache in WinForms is that events are hooked up in Visual Basic completely differently than in C#. In Visual Basic, we have the handles keyword. So that means that the events are hooked up at the method, while in C# we are well adding obviously the respected event delegate, if you will, in initialize component. So that is not a problem then instead of initialize component, but then the signature doing that with the handles keyword, that is one of the things that made it in the past so difficult to make it reliable. So that if you're in the designer and you go into the property window and then you double click on it, that the right signature is also then in Visual Basic picked up and then presented in the code editor. And the moment you do that and you want to go back in the old designer, you would no longer have that experience. And obviously the bar is, to change anything in framework is way too high. So people still are, taking code and want to round trip it. And this is probably going to change because it's holding us back. But at the moment, we're trying as hard as we can to not break that.
All right. The edits on application and control look like what one would expect.
What was the question?
Wasn't a question, just a comment.
Oh,
The-
okay.
These look control and application both gain the event, and then
Yeah,
control
so-
has the
So-
go raise the event.
Okay, so one thing to know, why is that the approach? We could just have like a static event on an application, but we're not doing that. This is a pattern in WinForms because should we do that and we start to hook up forms to static events, then let's say the risk that those forms get rooted are too high, and you would end up with memory leaks because the forms would never be collected even if they're closed because the events would still hold them. And so there's always the pattern in WinForms already that if you have an event that had actually static character, is still hooked up over control, so it can get disposed properly because the consuming events then are inside of the container, so to say, that consumes the quasi static event, and there's precedent for that.
It makes sense to me. The control should decide whether or not it wants to do something, not somebody have to go wire it into the application on every control. So
Yes.
like a third-party control could easily say, I want to know when this happens, I need to turn off my animation.
Yeah.
They can't get wired into the system one. I guess if anything, I'd ask, do we need the system one? But if that's the pattern, then that is the pattern. Sorry, do we need the static one? Instead of just putting it on the controls. But if it's the pattern,
Okay.
it's the pattern. Is the metric suffix what we would generally use for this? I mean, I assume so because you proposed it, but I understand it as metrics in the sense that it's talking about a measurement, but I feel like metrics usually, in my head, it connotates telemetry more than what size did someone tell you.
I think it is again spin-off of Windows, and if I remember correctly, and then also I want to avoid a unit.
Really, it's just does WinForms consistently use metrics instead of calling it sizes or whatever?
It yes and yes. It's basically calling it sizes or widths, but it's not very consistent, to be honest. And yes, we have a font matrix already, so so this is not a new name or not a new term.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like there's the text metrics. So metrics for sizes is already used. So I assume that's the animated GIFs keep on loading. All right. So sounds
Well-
like the only thing we're changing so far is inserting client animation here.
Yeah, quick question about system visual settings properties. I mean, like I'm noticing that some or maybe all of these properties is related to accessibility. And yeah, my question is like the properties that is specific for accessibility, should we have the word accessibility in the name or not? Because like it's not
Yeah.
obvious to me about like which property is really related to accessibility and which is generic for other purposes.
I mean, you can. I mean, I avoided to tie it down to accessibility because styling and accessibility really goes like blends together in that regard. and then also it has to do, in my opinion, with discoverability. Accessibility can also, unfortunately, be something that, how do I say that politically wise? That people, well, sometimes, unfortunately, implement last. They shouldn't, but it happens. So you still find a lot of WinForms apps that that should, like provide accessibility information instead of their UI, and they don't. And oh, we didn't have time for that yet, and so on. And I sometimes get the feeling that everything that starts with accessibility puts it automatically in kind of a niche where it shouldn't be. So I would really rather push against to have the word accessibility here to kind of normalize those things in a way that consider putting that up or taking that on.
But would it be obvious about like whoever implementing those? I mean, like to understand, yeah, this is really for accessibility. For example, about like text scale factor. I mean, like if I read the comment, it's saying like independent of display DPI. If I'm thinking about scale factor, so I will think about the DPI. I mean, like, so how? Yeah, my only point about like it's not clear to
I
me
get that.
about like
So
yeah.
the funny thing is that if you take a look at the Windows the Windows implementation of that particular text factor, then you find it in the accessibility section if you really go to it methodically. But then if you are on the home screen, then you get this feature presented as it was not an accessibility feature. So that alone shows me that that there is a line that from the terminology is sometimes crossed and shouldn't be. So that's my standpoint at this as well. So I would push back against having the name accessibility in it. Rather, I mean, and this is something where the API review should probably also deal with, but we have quite some things in terms of skills that we're working on. So I think skills can also help with certainly with accessibility, but also with discoverability. But the moment you say you want to have an accessible application, what should I do? Then it is actually the skill that should point you out either to present you a plan, and then you will discover the functionality, or even write the code or the code changes that you need. So I think the route to discoverability in the future lies more in how well we are preparing the skills for new features to put out there. Also, when it comes to migration of things, and the name then will, in my opinion, become less relevant. Not irrelevant, but less relevant. So those would be my argument for that.
Yeah, to just kind of plus one to you, Klaus, like as a kind of recent Android to iPhone convert, like shoving settings under accessibility sometimes makes it harder to find. Like,
Yeah.
I understand why access color is accessibility. I don't know if that's like the first place I would look, especially since whenever I change it, it's just under display settings or whatever, or theme.
Take dark mode itself, for example. So it was for a while it was a stylish thing, but then when I discussed dark mode when I have discussed dark mode with customers on, I don't know, occasions on conferences and so on, they say, hey, to me, meanwhile, it is really an accessibility issue, because when I'm working at night with the modern monitors, it's too freaking bright, and I mean, accessibility has always still this kind of not necessarily only positive connotation. I mean, let me try to phrase it as politically wise as I can, but it is unfortunately the case. So when I think it's a fine line when a feature becomes accessibility or not, and so accessibility most of all affects everybody. So not this is not a border that you cross when something is an accessibility feature. I'm sorry, I'm not. That is no.
No, I personally completely agree. I think accessibility, for better or worse, has derogatory connotations, and often things that are intended for accessibility in the positive sense often just end up being usability because everybody just uses
Yes.
things differently. I've always thought
So you
white
should think-
backgrounds was too bright, so I
For
love dark
for
fonts.
WinForms, I think so. We have a couple of things that are from the API standpoint really starts with the accessibility, but those features mostly in 90% of the cases really are for supporting things like
Screen
screen
readers.
readers,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So, and I would leave it with that.
Yeah, so I don't think we need to slap accessibility in anywhere because again, client area animation for some people that's you're setting off my epilepsy, and for some people that's stop wearing down my battery. So it's not always an accessibility feature.
Oh, like on remote desktop servers when you really have a bad connection, that can really be annoying also because
Right.
it just eats
So-
up the bandwidth.
So I think us trying to figure out which things here we should call accessibility is not going to be a winning move. The only winning move is not to play the game.
I'd put
One
the
day one of you will
accessibility
laugh.
thing in the same bucket as globalization too. People see either of the terms and they go, "Oh, I don't need to think about that because I'm only targeting X," and then they decide to completely skip over a generally useful feature.
Yeah.
Or even correctness requirement.
All right. So I believe we've only made one change.
Mhm.
Does anybody believe differently? Which means I missed something? Oh, good. Someone admits to having laughed. All right. Oh, I don't need to drag this over. I'm not showing a shape. I'm just copy pasting. Bloop. Why can I never type that word? All right. Danke, Klaus.
Gern geschehen. Ich habe zu danken.
Where's approved? Okay. We only have 8 minutes left. I assume that's not enough for kiosk mode.
No, but it may be enough for 14.585 because that is super important.
Is that another issue you
Because-
forgot to mark ready for review?
No. Yes. Well, I marked
No.
it now.
Yeah.
Okay. This is important because it has to do with a long-standing performance issue that we have in WinForms when it comes to suspending painting and suspending layout in a meaningful way, and so that people are not forgetting to restore the suspended things. And at the same time, and it is so super important for me because if I wanted to take it, I need like two interface or one interface so that I can have the designer generate the correct code. The animated GIF shows what it is about. It is in certain situations, especially when you have designed for for high DPI, and that is one of the big migration blockers right now. That we need to go from pixel perfect layouts to table layout based layouts. But the problem is that if you don't do it right, and if you don't do it, like in the right order, then the cascading of the recalculation of the layout inside of WinForms classically cannot change. Is there since NetFX 2.0 is so freaking slow that you can literally look what is happening. And there's a way to do that, and we already do that in a couple of cases. For example, if you rebuild a list box, or if you rebuild a list view, or a couple of other things that have a lot of elements that you need to refresh, we have the begin update and the end update methods. What they do is they suspend painting and they suspend layout internally. I think that so we tested that over a long time, and there can be a way to do that per se if you opt in WinForms. But we wanted to make sure that we find a way to do it so that we have a scope, and if the scope goes out of scope, another way, using it, and then when it's disposed, then the thing is automatically freed. And this is what that API is about. So the interface I support, suspend painting, would provide the same functionality as then the suspend painting scope. The first one would be for the designer, because I cannot, scope it inside of the designer. Support suspend, or I support the pattern is already an established designer term, like I support initialize, and there are a couple of other things that we do it that way, and then using it would be you would be use the scope, and if it goes out of context, then it would implicitly indispose and suspend painting. And this is like how the sample, for example, has been done, and the performance improvement is really dramatic in that regard. But this is from being very, very slow to almost instantly, and that's why it would be so important to have. You're muted.
For the interface implementers, are they expected, if I call like suspend painting, begin suspend painting twice, do I have to call and suspend painting twice?
I think there's a ref count. Yes, we do that, but this is the same pattern that we have with suspend layout, resume layout, and so on. So same thing.
Gotcha. Not breaking new ground. I was just curious. All right.
Mm.
Okay, so you want the interface to be the old begin end pattern.
Yes,
Then,
and the interface really is the necessity for the designer, actually.
fair enough. And I agree that there are already a lot of WinForms I support instead of a something-able. They mean the same
Yeah.
thing, but
Yes.
I support is more a clearly pronouncing the I in I support suspend painting.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what we recommend in the design guidelines, right?
No, you're baiting me. All right.
I am disposable. That's how I read it. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Right. So then I assume your third overload here is traverse, but only when you say so. It will traverse, but then you can say false on particular things. So it's
I mean, it's traversing one way or the other because we have to. This is the point. We have to find the right order to suspend the containers when they're nested. But then there are certain cases when you don't want to be suspend a middle one, but then the next one might be a table layout control that you want to suspend, and that is then the method to actually fine control those situations.
What does no traversal versus top level only mean?
Um, uh, phew. So top level would just go one level,
All right, so
and
none is the control itself. Top level
yeah,
only is its children, and traverses its
sure,
entire
that's what
family tree.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And if you traverse and you don't want to traverse every level, then you would use the delegate version to control to fine control what you want to do or not want to do.
Okay. Oh, really, that was just me making sure, or seeing should they be collapsed into one thing, but they're two. So your first overload is the control itself. Second overload is whatever target you say, and third overload is do the full graph walk of traverse, but pass every control in the tree through this filter.
Yeah, and remember the non one is then also we're so primarily we're suspend the painting. We're not suspending the layout. If you only want to suspend the painting, and the painting is for the whole, it's just for the whole top level window altogether anyway. It doesn't make any other sense. So that means that if you choose none, or if you don't pass an argument, you leave it out, then you're only suspending the painting. That makes sense in scenarios where you have like a cascadic painting that holds you down, but not so much the layout because it doesn't change. Only if the combination of layouting and painting is important for you, then you would add the layout parameters, and then you would say, okay, this is like the top level one. This is the parent that you don't want to, it would, the first one would be like suspend painting, and then on that container control suspend layout, but then you would have to, on the container control, the first one in the first level, you would resume the layout. And then if you want to traverse, but because then comes the nested part that is actually besides the painting, burns so much fuel because of the nested layout. Then you would traverse, specifically filter out the table layout controls that you want to suspend, and then and that is actually what in combination makes them the big performance improvement, if that makes sense.
I don't know if WinForms uses this terminology, but the XML and other DOMs use children and descendants. How do people feel about renaming the traversals to other words?
I'm very good with that because actually I also want to, for .NET 12, introduce the same methods that we find in Roslyn, but we're like, when we're able to traverse children and ancestors and so on, because there are really a lot of other things where we can be much quicker when we provide the traversal internal algorithm, except the customer, have to do this recursive thing. And so yes, yeah.
So Klaus, you like my new names better? Stefan, Tanner.
Yeah, it seems
So
reasonable.
children is one layer and descendants is like all like recursive. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think that's the terminology that we use in XML. And there-
Versus top level only in traverse. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the second's better.
okay.
I mentioned in chat. I get is suspense painting scope valuable versus just returning iDisposable?
There was, oh damn, there was a reason for that, yeah.
I guess alternatively, your suspends painting scope you show having a public constructor taking a target, but you don't expose the target. Did you mean to?
But
But-
let's say,
What do you
But-
mean? I support suspense painting as part of this, right?
No. But this takes one in a public constructor, but doesn't have a property
I
saying what
see.
was the target. But most people aren't
I
going to
got
see
you
it
now.
anyway. We expect they're just going to throw it in a using statement, right? Like,
Yeah.
so that's the question of, do we need the type to be public at all, or should it just be say that it's iDisposable and all that you care is that you put it in a using?
Yeah, like I think, to the API where we were copying WinForms that Jeff pointed to in the MCP C# SDK, we just use iDisposable. I think we use the iDisposable for iService scope. But if
Yeah.
this is consistent with like what WinForms does elsewhere, then
ASN1 uses the public disposable, but it's a struct. So it needs to be public in order to not be boxed.
it's so that was one thing that we were thinking about the ref struct instead, but then we couldn't skip an await in the process, and so that would like exclude it for having that. Yeah.
and I was wrong about service scope. Sorry. It returns an iService scope, which is iDisposable. So it's a little different than just directly returning an
Okay.
iDisposable.
Fair enough. But
Whew.
yeah, I mean, on the one hand, we only get one chance to get this right. See also the previous, we can't change the return type. But on the other, I'm having trouble imagining we would ever want to add something on this. So if we're planning on it being a class, then I think we should just say iDisposable.
I agree. I just can't imagine what we'd want to add to the return type, especially if the normal usage is just to put in a using. I guess, I mean, it's easy to get the value and do
I mean,
stuff with it.
it's-
But I just don't know what you get.
It's I mean, these are extended extender methods, right? I mean, what would be my hook for iDisposable? That would not work.
Hmm?
This
What
is-
wouldn't work?
So these are extension methods, like in control mutation extensions.
We're not saying get rid of the interface. We're saying don't make this type be public.
Yeah, so all the extension methods would just return iDisposable is the proposal.
So this becomes internal, and then this says iDisposable. Your extension target is still there. But like none of your samples did you
okay,
save a local.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
You will.
I see.
Okay, I lie. And
No,
this one
no,
you
it's
saved
fine.
as a
Yeah,
local
yeah.
because you wanted to
Okay.
use the braceless using, which requires naming a variable.
Yes. No, that's fine. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I couldn't follow. I couldn't follow you quickly enough.
Yeah, well, we start moving on. Like, will we need to add any properties to this in the future? And I think don't think so.
No.
Okay, so suspended painting scope should be an internal type. Okay.
So for the kiosk, no.
Why?
Sorry, I'm pushing my luck. I know.
No, I mean we don't have time to talk about another one. For control, you've explicitly implemented the interface member, and then added a virtual. Why are you doing the interface erasure?
So the problem is that we already have a couple of methods that are doing a similar kind of thing, and I have to, let's say, consolidate the past, and that is the reason for that, because I want every control to be, included in that thing. But since we already had begin, suspend, and end suspend with no interface definition, I have to have a way to delegate it down to the controls that already had it, and that's pretty much the reason for that. So it's sort of unifying the approach to the controls that are that came with it, and standardize the approach for that.
You're supposed to use the extension methods anyway, right? So I guess those still show up.
Yeah, except that the original controls wouldn't know what to do in that case without help.
What's the? Oh, probably helps if I spell it right. Because I'm not seeing a suspend paint method on anywhere in WinForms.
Exactly, and the problem is they do a suspend paint. It is not called suspend paint. It is called begin update and end update.
Okay.
And it's also not interface driven, and the designer can also not control it, which is the problem actually.
So begin update is going to also call the begin suspend painting core?
But it's actually the other way around. So because we cannot change the implementation, that would work theoretically, but that would probably break the world. So no, cast it to the interface, and then pretty much you would route it to begin update and end update if you would direct traverse down. It would hit it. Would do the it would just do a begin. I'm sorry. What's it called again? The interface, the new interface methods. Suspend painting and end painting would then be calling begin update and end update respectively. If that makes sense.
I don't understand how adding a new method where one calls the other, like, it matters which direction you go.
Right.
As
Like
far as breaking
I'm
changes.
just confused why this isn't public
So if the design,
virtual begin suspend painting.
if the designer, if we implement it into the designer have cannot know what control is behind it. It just needs to. It just generates the code, so it needs to be working with I support suspend painting, and since so control per se supports suspend painting, and so the designer can pick it up. Remember, the designer can also deal with components. They don't do that.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I guess
now,
what this is actually doing.
retrofitting a special behavior. So how do you suspend? How can a control opt into how it suspends? Is something that a control can decide. And
Right. So the question was
controls. If we already have controls that do that with begin update and end update, we need a way to include those controls with their existing behaviors in an infrastructure that is then surfacing to the designer in the same way. And that is the is the reason to do that. Does that make sense?
No, not at all. Like this shape would work with the designer just fine.
Yeah.
The question is, why'd you do this way? But I'm gonna say, I guess you did this way because you don't want people to call the begin and end methods. You want them to just use the disposing method.
Right, exactly.
So these are hiding
I
the
agree with
begin
that.
end pattern and saying just call the dispose one. I was just trying to figure out why we were doing explicit implementation here.
Oh yeah, yeah, that one. Yeah, but the protected virtual, I was.
Yeah, I know why
I
it
was-
needs to be virtual.
Oh,
I was just asking why we were doing explicit implementation, and it's because we don't want callers to call control.begin suspend. We want them to just call
yeah,
suspend.
exactly,
Exactly.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
So-
yes,
otherwise
yes,
they
yes, yes.
both show up and they
Yeah.
look very similar.
So now I get it.
Yep.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Is why were we doing
Okay, yeah,
explicit implementation? So okay, and I think everything else is an override. No, you have more stuff down here. Form
Oh.
reveal.
So, yeah, but that's a simple one. When you're in dark mode, and you guys have probably seen that it's a Windows problem. It's an accessibility problem. Sorry, I forgot about that. And you open a window, then in Windows there's a white flash before it gets dark, and that is something really annoying. That happens really, really often. There is a way by cloaking the window at the beginning of the first show to just do nothing until the background color is set. That is how the later version of Edge, for example, in dark mode, are doing that. So there was like a transition, I don't know, a couple of months ago, 6 months ago, where this flashing stopped in Edge. So when you now open open Edge and you're in dark mode, then there is no first white and then the actually black thing. And this flash thing is a problem for many people. And the form reveal method is you can on application you can kind of generalize shut it off. It is exclusively for dark mode by default, so it doesn't regress the standard path because we didn't have dark mode before for older applications. And then it just makes the top level window cloaked until the background is actually set to the darker color, so we avoid the flashing. It's the only thing it does.
Can't change the default, can we?
So the
Seems
default
nice.
is, yeah. So the default is first of all, default is like the standard naming of how application works. So we have like already a series of methods that are a method for setting the value and are a property for reading it. What was done on application from the beginning, and the default is just that you don't want to enable the non-flashing for every form that you have. You want to have a way where you are where you're opting in, and the way we are opting in is in dark mode. The revealing deferred is the default, and in classic mode it is not. So when someone moves from Framework to .NET, then they don't have dark mode because that was not available in Framework. That means we cannot regress anything. But if they have dark mode, then for accessibility reasons, it makes sense to have it revealed by default, so they don't have to, like adjust 500 forms that they have. And that is the reason we have the property both on application that sets the default for the whole application, and then the form picks it up and can opt out.
And is inherit being -1 kind of a standard thing?
Yes.
And then why did we decide application needs a bool in addition to the form reveal mode? Oh, so one's the default and the other, no, but this is form reveal deferred is for the default, right?
Well, you want to know what is actually now the source of truth. Because
Why
if
not
it's
just
set
return
to,
the form reveal mode instead of have a bool? Can you
because
have
it could be
current form
inherit.
reveal mode?
It could be inherit, and then you don't know what it is.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
So is the default inherit, and then this boolean is telling you what inherit means in your context?
Yes, and that is also again
Okay.
like dark mode does the same thing. We call it is dark mode enabled, and here we're calling it is form reveal deferred. It's the same thing because dark mode is also like we call that ambient properties, and the special version of ambient properties. Like in WinForms, you have font, for example, which by the way is now a problem. We have font. If you set the font for the form, then it also automatically like propagates down to every child control, and which makes it the ambient property. But then there are ambient properties that also allows you to opt out of the or break the chain by going from inherit to something else. I wished we had that for color and for font also, because sometimes it's really a problem. For example, if you have a group box and you want to have a bold thing over the group box, but only for the group box, that's a problem because then you have to opt out for every single control inside of the group box because they automatically also become bold, which you don't want, obviously. You want the emphasis on the group box title to make it more prominent. And yeah, but
All right. Well, we're at 200% overrun on this issue, so I think the only thing we've done so far is change layout suspend traversal.
Yeah.
Are we happy with these two blocks? Okay. Writing down the why'd we do explicit implementation. Let's see.
And then the other thing was changing the concrete type to iDisposable.
oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's true. I did have those changes. I just said the only one we changed, so I was wrong. So, nope, that's just a leftover note. Rename the layout suspend travel members. All right, rename layout suspend traversal. We got rid of suspend painting scope, or rather, you'll have it, but it'll be internal. And and I'm just writing down why control is explicitly implementing the interface instead of implicitly implementing it. So, and then I'm sure that apply application defaults event args in VB application services is super important, and we'll just sign off on it because you wrote VB. All right. Happy?
I have one last question. It's just a general question. Are we still using the experimental attribute in general, or is it?
I mean, we're using experimental. If you believe that there is something calling it not stable, you shouldn't put experimental on it just forever. So
No,
if
I mean
you put it on, you should be expecting to remove it when a trigger
actually, the
happens.
question would be if I have something that I want to that I want experimental, would it still need an API review if it was a new API?
Yes,
Okay, that was the actual
because
question.
we still want to get it. We want to get it as close to perfect in the first go. Ideally, all that we do is remove experimental, and then we're done.
Okay, okay.
All right, chat has suggested inserting direct here, so we have target only, target and direct children, and target and descendants. Does anyone want to agree or disagree?
So we'd have target only, target and direct children, target and descendants.
Yep.
Why children there instead of direct descendants?
Yeah, I feel like it, again, at least from XML and then anything that came after that, that we've had children are the things that belong to a parent node, and descendants are their children and all of their children's children.
And I would second that, because that is the pattern that Roslyn does it also with nodes. So
Yeah. I understand what children means. It doesn't include grandchildren. And
Yeah.
I understand descendants includes children. I think both of those terms generally just break out. But if we were to change it, I don't think direct children is clear. I think we'd want direct descendants then. But
enough.
I
I
think
think
that's fair.
direct descendants is less clear than children.
Yeah, I like it as is, but I think that's fair. That direct descendants sounds better than direct children, which sounds redundant.
I don't know. I would be like direct descendants. Isn't that just children?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, children's better than them both. Yeah, exactly. Children is better than direct descendants, which is better than direct children.
If I saw direct descendants, my thought would be, okay, it must not be children. And so how does that imply descendants? Because there's like direct lineage and indirect lineage once you get into the full tree. So it's like it gets
They're the
interesting.
in-laws.
Yeah, I'd start thinking about it weird.
Oh no,
What
in-law nodes.
does this not include nodes? If I pull the node, insert it into another tree, and then it carried some children along, do those not count?
Yeah, grandchildren by, marriage after. Yeah, I have no idea.
That would be step grandchildren.
All
All right.
Yeah, after divorces, then it'd be like step grandchildren or something.
All right. We are massively over time, and I should have left 10 minutes ago. So I think we're going to call it there for today. And yes, I did mention we might be jumping up to multiple reviews. That won't happen this Thursday because I have a conflict. But I will be talking with some people to ask if we have quorum and consensus that we should meet twice next week, especially because we'll be canceled the week after unless somebody wants to host while I'm in Las Vegas. So, all right. With all that, thanks for joining. Thanks for your good feedback, and we'll see you next week at our same .NET time, at our same .NET channel, and it won't be any sooner than that, but there may be more to come later. Today was German, so until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Wiedersehen.